Currently the Senior Policy Advisor on Empty Homes at the Scottish Government, although in a previous life, not that long ago, I was a statistician, and prior to that I worked in IT, and off and on I've been using GIS for about 14 years now, back in the days when it was a damn sight less friendly than it is today. And during my return to policy over the last 9 months to a year, it's very, very evident to me that GIS has a very, very prominent role to play, not just in housing, but in all sorts of policy. The rule is that if data has a geographic component, there is a role for GIS. And that is chimed with our GIS people in Scottish Government internally, and there's currently an internal review going on at the moment to look at the way that GIS is used in Scottish Government, and I'm pretty certain that a lot of you guys in councils are probably going to be using GIS in your day-to-day work. Anthony there at the back is going to feel a sense of deja vu, given that I gave him a very, very similar presentation on GIS at Midlothian Council 3 or 4 years ago, so feel free to nod off Anthony if some of this is repetitive. As a sort of quick show of hands, how many of you in this room actually use GIS? Well, that's great. I'm preaching to the converted in most cases. At the moment, I didn't have access to any Empty Homes data, which is a bit of a negative in doing a talk on GIS and empty homes. So what I've got is essentially some slides about visualization of data and some synthesized empty homes data that hopefully you can relate to your work in empty homes. But I did a quick Google search, or rather a Wikipedia search the other day of what GIS is. It of course stands for Geographic Information System, and GIS can encompass a whole suite of applications, including the more recent online GIS systems such as Google Maps, such as Bing Maps, and so forth. However, a lot of us that have used GIS for a long time think of GIS as a full IT application, either ArcGIS or MapInfo. How many of you guys actually use ArcGIS? Are the rest of you on MapInfo, or are you using sort of your own sort of bespoke systems? Right, so there's generally a bit of a difference there in the actual usage of the tools. In Scottish Government, we tend to use ArcGIS when we make data available, for example, Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, or the postcode index file, that's available as ARC shapefiles, and I'm sure a lot of you probably use that information at the moment. As far as the background mapping goes, things like the Ordnance Survey mapping, boundary mapping, etc., that's available to everyone in local government. I'm sure it's still available to everyone through the One Scotland Mapping Agreement. It's basically an arrangement where Ordnance Survey products are available across the Scottish public sector at much reduced cost. GIS, according to Wikipedia, is a system designed to capture, store, manipulate, analyse, manage and present geographical data. It's a long-winded way of saying it's basically a database that interacts visually. So if you're more used to Access or Excel, a GIS can take that data and make it visual, and in many cases make it real, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the data sing, we're trying to make patterns visible, we're trying to look at trends, that sort of thing, which is very, very difficult to do if all you're dealing with is tabular forms of data. As I said before, if data has a geographical component, and in local and central government, what data doesn't? If it's about a person, it's geographical. If it's about a place, it's geographical. Things like council tax data is geographical, benefit recipient data is geographical, homelessness data is geographical. Sources that I've used in the past. It can make patterns easier to spot and the messages clearer. The old saying says, a picture paints 1,000 words. If you write a textual interpretation of something, that is quite difficult in many ways to get across to people. Whereas if you give someone a visual representation, they can draw their own opinions from it, their own views from it. They can spot patterns, they can spot trends. One of the things in empty homes that it has a real role for is identifying clusters of empty homes, so that you can maybe identify an area that might warrant a project-oriented approach as apart from a sort of pepper pot approach. What we'll look at in the following few slides is basically some examples looking at housing affordability, which was my bread and butter when I was a statistician. That's one of the base spreadsheets there, which has council area name down the left, the number of clean house sale transactions, next column. Then we've got lower quartile house price, lower quartile income, and the house price income ratio. That lower quartile house price to lower quartile income is essentially the entry level first time buyer metric that's often used to determine whether an area is affordable or whether an area isn't affordable to a first time buyer without assistance from other areas. And again, when you look at the house price income ratios there at the right, you can see that it's up in the region of, let's see, East Renfrewshire 6.2, Eastern Bartonshire 6.1, East Lothian 7.84. You know, so you can already spot trends when you look at it tabular, but when you look at it visually, then it begins to make a lot more sense. It comes alive essentially. What we have on this slide is essentially local authority sales at the lower quartile level, which is shaded from up to 60,000, which is yellow, all the way up to brown. And immediately, without trawling down that list, you can see Aberdeenshire's got an affordability problem, Edinburgh's got an affordability problem, East Lothian's got an affordability problem, East Renfrewshire, Eastern Bartonshire. So it's far easier to visualise on a map than it is when you're looking through tabular data. It makes patterns much easier to spot. Obviously, Edinburgh and the Lothians, you can see there's obviously a pattern there. In Edinburgh and East Lothian, very expensive, very unaffordable. Mid Lothian, West Lothian, a bit more affordable, although the tipping point seems to have been in 2009 for Mid Lothian, given that that's when the ratios began to get quite steep. This one here, we've got lower quartile income. So this is basically 25 percentile point through the distribution of income. So this is largely, obviously, median income is average income, lower quartile income is generally sort of entry-level employment. Lower decile income is when you get to the area where people are more likely to be on benefits. This income source is the commercial CACI paycheck data, which allows you to calculate average income, median income, and any other percentile point in between. It's very, very powerful. It's also an income source that we as Scottish Government provide to you guys as local authorities through the annual CHMA LHS data pack, which some of you may well be aware of. So it's a very, very powerful source of income, and we actually provide it to you guys at intermediate geography level, because that's the real power of paycheck. Other sources such as annual survey of hours and earnings, or the food and expense, or the family resources survey, I think it's called, they're at local authority level. What you can do with a source like paycheck is that you can actually spot issues at the very, very low geographical level. Again, this is down by lower quartile house price ratio at local authority level. And again, you can see that the average in Scotland at this time, which I think was 2009, 2010, is in the region of 46. So obviously there's still big affordability issues with housing in Scotland for private ownership. Again, this is one of the real powers of GIS, the ability to actually drill down into a sub-local authority level. So I know we're in Glasgow today, but this is Edinburgh, and you can see a bit of Mid Lothian to the bottom, East Lothian's peeking in there to the right, and we've got West Lothian to the left. It's got lower quartile house price sales. So again, this is entry-level properties. This is essentially 1 2-bedroom flats, maybe into 1 2-bedroom terrace, or semi-detached properties as well. So this is the average cost, or the lower quartile cost rather, for these entry-level properties. It goes from yellow up to brown again, like the last one, and you can see the real affordability hotspots in Edinburgh, round about Corstorphine, round about Cramond, Craiglockhart, Morningside, Fairmile Head, the sort of areas that, if you know the Edinburgh market. Is anyone here from Edinburgh Council, by the way? So you might well recognise some of those patterns there. Again, this one shows lower quartile level income. And again, if you look at a lower quartile income level at local authority level, it doesn't really tell you much. But through the power of Paycheck, you can see that right down to data zone level within the local authority itself. So again, the scale is similar from yellow to brown, and you can see that even at lower quartile level, round about Craman, round about Christorfin, round about Fairmount Head, round about Collington, these are the areas that have the highest levels of income within Edinburgh, so that gives you a good idea. Areas you can see, again, if you use things like index of multiple deprivation, if you looked at the most deprived areas, you would identify that as round about Granton, round about Leith, round about, well, one thing in Simd has always looked funny is the Arthur Seat. You ever see the circle round about there? So that often distorts that position, given that it's whole Scotland coverage. But there's a very, very strong correlation between Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation and income, because that's the biggest component in deprivation is income. And one of the geeky exercises we looked at was actually to rebase Paycheck into income deciles, so that we were looking at the level of income in the bottom decile deprivation and then every decile in between. And we had a linear relationship from first decile to top decile deprivation. In fact, the 50th percentile for income on Simd, the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, the data zone right in the bang middle, was actually the median income for Scotland, which in statistical terms I think is known as a fluke. But it gives you the strong idea of the correlation between those sources. And this one gives you the ratio of lower quartile income to house price. So again, affordability in Edinburgh, pretty bad, as you would expect. Again, you can see some of the areas, for example here in Limberton, Gilmerton, still quite affordable. Round about Granton, obviously very affordable. But again, some of these areas, there's very few sales, because a lot of these areas are predominantly social rented, so some of the properties that come onto the market are likely to be ex-RTB. Right, that's using GIS to take a polygon map of data zones, 6,505 in Scotland, and basically changing the shading to suit an underlying database. And that gives you an idea of how GIS can then be used in empty homes. But using that sort of shading isn't really enough. You need to get not just sub-local authority level, but really sub-short area level, down to address level. And for that you use point data. Although I'm using, as a lead-in, a little map showing the concentration of RSL lets over 2009-10. The bigger the dot, the more lets there were. So if you were looking, for example, at empty homes, the bigger the dot, the more empties that you have. But what you really want to be able to do is look at sub-geography level, look at street level, look at individual property level, because that really is the nub of the matter. And I would thoroughly, in fact, I would strongly recommend that if you're developing an empty homes database, you really need to have the address point of the property on there as well, so that if you're doing subsequent analysis and if you're going into further detail, then it means it's dead easy to point on a map. What you have there is assessor portal data, which in theory should be available to everyone in councils, and it's available online as well. But every dot you can see there represents an empty house, represents a house. It's an address point data set. So if you were to plot empty properties on that map, it might look something like that. I'd hope not, given this is actually a very, very fine geographical level. It's actually in Christorfin at the west end of Edinburgh. But if these were the location of your empty properties, this one here really stands out in that you've got practically a whole street of empties. So if you were looking at tackling properties of a pepper-potted nature, or properties that are actually on a concentrated nature, then in my mind that would be the ones that you would hit first, because you wouldn't have the geography issue. you could look at that, look at the issues surrounding that area and see if there's anything that you can do to bring those properties back into use. If you were to go back to the table in rows, it would be very difficult if that was a table of addresses or a table of points to actually spot those concentrations. But when you see it such as that, it makes it dead easy to spot. And it saves you one hell of a lot of time, providing you've got that georeference based data. The corporate address gazetteers that you hold as well, again, that's another great source, because in theory that should have properties referenced down to the individual geographical level. And in theory, again, the real power in that is to be able to spot concentrations. And if you wanted to overlay other data on it, say benefits data or whatever other data that you're trying to compare it with, you can overlay that onto that as well and to see if there's any correlation between that. So today's very, very quick run through has been a very quick primer as to how I think GIS can help in empty homes work. If anyone out there would like to contact me, I'm more than happy to work with you all on an individual basis, time permitting, obviously. But obviously the thing that is the most important is your base data. Without the base data that Mike was talking about earlier on, you couldn't plot it like that, you couldn't spot the patterns. But it's a very useful way to augment your data and to try and visualize the data and to understand the data. But the sources of the point data, your empty homes databases, when you're developing them. And again, the point data can be drawn from the corporate address gazetteer, the council tax data or the assessors portal. But at the end of the day, if you're using your address gazetteer for other purposes, if you've been able to link that back to your empty homes database, then again, that improves the power of your own internal intelligence systems within your authorities, so that you can compare it with benefits, you can compare it with school data, you can compare it with repairs data, say if you're, say, in an area where there's your own stock, but it's been pepper potted through right to buy, and some of those properties are then empty, then it gives you an idea and gives you more intelligence. But that's a very, very quick whistle-stop tour. And again, if I had empty homes data, it would have been great to have been able to brainstorm with Mike and some of you guys on doing it. But until we've got access to some real data, a lot of it is theoretical at the moment. But is there any questions on that? Go for it, Kristen.
Yeah, it's probably the technical kind of question. When you say point data, is there a particular format that has to be in? Is it different than just an address?
X and Y, yeah. The GIS sees things as a grid, an X coordinate and a Y coordinate, and it's the accuracy of that. You get different levels of grid reference from kilometres, miles, hundreds of miles, say, right down to meters. And this is in meters, so each of these points has an X and a Y coordinate. But again, you're right, it's addresses. If you can match your empty homes address to your CAG, and your CAG has the cleaned X and Y coordinates, you can map it. In theory, it should be quite simple, but the important thing about, one of the things I dealt with in addressing was, for my sins, I did the numerators address books for the 2001 census. And what was obvious in doing that is that addresses are stored and saved in so many different ways. And a lot of the work I've done since as a housing analyst was flats are a nightmare. Flat 1, 2, flat 1A, flat 1B. There's no standard format for address matching for flats in Scotland at the moment, or in Britain for that matter. Most of it's drawn from the postcode address file, the PAF as it's known through Royal Mail. And again, the PAF really feeds into things like the corporate address gazetteers and the assessor's portal. That's largely drawn from the postcode address file.
If you have your council tax data and you have a separate report from the assessor's portal, you just be cross-matching.
Yeah, you could cross-match it. And an ideal, one of the things that we were evangelists about was UPRNs, and they are beginning to work. They are in. You should be on your CAGs. And Registers of Scotland have started to store those on the sales data. UPRN stands for Unique Property Reference Number, so it's a standard code, one property.
Adrian Hayden from Local Authority, Chief Accounting Officers, and just at the bottom of this, coming into Homes. Well, a bit surprised to you say that there appears to be no data on empty homes. I should have thought that was a pretty significant shortcoming, wondering what the...
Sorry, I should amplify that what we're talking about is the empty homes databases that Mike's just mentioned. We do have information on number of empty homes. It's on your council tax records, because your council tax colleagues have to know if a home is empty or not so that they can apply the appropriate discount structure. So again, that's the first port of call for that data. Obviously the stuff that Mike spoke about is taking it from a different way. But again, his mailing list would have come from the council tax records. And then the data that was flowing into your database was through your questionnaires. But yeah, there is data on empty homes, but it's bringing it out and bringing it together. We certainly don't have that in government, in central government. What we have is the very rough, I suppose, summary returns from our local government C-tax base returns that gives us an annual count of the number of empty properties attracting the various discounts. And that's where, obviously, the 25,000 properties came from. So we in central government don't have the data, otherwise I would try to beg, borrowed or steal something that I could have used to show you. But obviously I don't have access to your council tax data. And again, from the 2010 Act, the amendment that was passed last year has enabled you to share that data, much easier than you were able. Is that section 157?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, that's one to quote if you're having trouble getting your data from council tax colleagues. But again, it's just about talking with each other. In empty homes work, it's not just a housing matter, it's a revenue and benefits matter. We've been speaking to them a lot through the proposals for the council tax levy that we're about to take to Parliament. And it's also about the council tax as well. So it's just about bringing the key individuals in your areas together and saying, right guys, how do we crack this problem?
I'm going to ask a heretical question, Stuart. I'll probably get aroused from the person I completely agree with GIS, power that GIS has. What's particularly powerful at is making visual things that are not visual, like house prices and incomes, which you can't see them. I'm not so sure that it's as crucial for empty homes, and it would be inconceivable to me that a cluster like that would exist and you wouldn't know about it anyway. I mean, you actually could probably talk quite easily from an address list because you'd see the addresses together. And I suppose I can see the value in GIS, but I'm not sure it's as valuable as other data sets for empty homes. And I think that the main point that seems to come from this is that you have to get the core data right, full stop. If you choose to map it, then I'm not sure this is completely saying this is a vital thing to do at this stage.
Well, let's open up to the floor. You guys that are dealing with empty homes on a day-to-day basis in councils, what's your view on that?
We mapped it, and we just strategy, we put together strategies, but we didn't actually end up doing it in the strategy.
Right.
Because I think as Gavin said, when you're saying you've got so many empty homes, probably in manner, you can sell the customer. We know where they are, we know we want to bring them back into use in the main areas of housing needs, so they're a bit surplus requirements once we actually did it.
Yeah, certainly at a strategy development level, and I think that's where it sees most use. I've been involved in LHS reviews and the housing need and demand assessment work, and GIS plays a core role in that. But again, what it can do is it can evidence why you need something on empty homes in your strategy to begin with. And that in itself is very important, because if it's not in your strategy, if it's not in your LHS and it's not in your HNDA, you're going to have real difficulty in trying to move forward with empty homes work in the future, which is one of the reasons why we've been quite keen to stress that point when LHSs come round for review, and when the CHMA do their next round of HNDAs. We want to see that empty homes mainstreamed. We don't, in an ideal world, that is how empty homes are going to be tackled. It's going to be mainstreamed into other policy. So that rather than tackle empty homes as a policy in its own right, it's seen as part of the round and is seen as one of the solutions. Obviously, I work at a national level. I don't work at local level. you know, and at a national level, when you're looking at the whole of Scotland, yeah, it's important to be able to visualise. I don't think for one moment you're going to see a street of empty homes, but at the end of the day, all I wanted to try and get across to you is that it helps you spot clusters that would be difficult to spot otherwise. Because say they were in a line down here, that wouldn't be the same street, it would be neighbouring streets. You can't always spot that from an address list.
Yeah, can I just add, actually, it's very interesting. About 5 years ago, on the edge of Surrey, commuter belts, country into London, we found such a street of empty properties. And the owner I mentioned right at the end of my presentation, he looks on it as a passion to bring joint properties back into use. And these were workmen's cottages that were semi-derelict. We had to threaten the CPO, and he rushed off to his solicitor, and we hammered out an agreement that he'd bring each property back into use to a habitable standard, a rate of 1 a month, which he honoured. And within 9 months, we had 9 or 10 properties back into use, occupied, tenanted out. So it can happen anywhere. It's not just the middle of Edinburgh.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can happen.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, I use ArcGIS, I'm professional.
Yeah.
And from a rural point of view, I feel it would be very, very useful. And I mean, we've got the housing even in Burton and also we take that and also field poverty issues, you know, in the pictures. And if you can identify empty homes, you know, cost out homes and bring in the field poverty measures as well, you know, the refurbishment. Things like
Absolutely.
that. You know, that's where I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Okay.
Yeah, John McCann, very council. I think the good thing about the GIS and using it with the local housing strategy is that whatever component of your local housing strategy you're actually building in, whether it's homelessness or specific needs, empty homes, private rent, HA homes, whatever you need, but if there is a benefit to actually exposing all of that to GIS, because you never can quite tell what it means to us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think personally, you know, I take the point that it's unlikely that as officers get good contact with those services, that you would not know of a street or a patch that's got a particular number of empty homes in it. And although I know of these empty houses, there would not be enough of a local authority officer who even know that they're empty. But I live near them, and I'm usually responsible for the strategy in that patch. And this is a very small street, it's a cul-de-sac. It's started to lay the back of a house or housing estate that's in a number of demolitions. It's next door to a scrapyard. There will be very few folk in Kirkcaldy who actually know that that street exists. And there's at least 2,000 houses, flats in this, you know, small cul-de-sac are empty and derelict. But there's a couple of really pristine ones in the middle that somebody's obviously spending money on, but they're living in to any interested observer will help.
Exactly. Yeah.
And GIS would throw them up because anyone that me actually say to colleagues in the past, are you remember about that bit? Nothing ever happens, you know, we generalise because it's got to be out of sight, out of mind.
It's certainly not the solution, absolutely, you know, but it is a tool that you can put in your toolbox, absolutely. Sheila?
We have, in Glasgow, we use GIS, ArcGIS, and a point data set. Some will be familiar with issues in Avonhill, and basically it was the GIS, putting the information into GIS that allowed us to see and show the evidence of the anecdotal information we had in that area, and I would say that it's been absolutely crucial for moving things
Yeah.
forward.
That's a good example, absolutely. And again, it's getting that message across to people that might not have a lot of time, you know, to sit and look through a report. You know, if you can show them visually, then it saves so much time, even if it takes you, say, half an hour to produce your map. But yeah.
Can I just add with our experience with it? I was starting with the council tax data, which of course gives categories of discounts and exemptions, and they're all classified and you know what they are, and and the time limits. So I could analyse based on that better to see what the patterns were in terms of overtime. But the biggest challenge was the council tax data with its unique way of expressing addresses within the allotted fields. It was a big task to get XY code attached to the address, because the council tax address expression wasn't in any way similar to either the assessor's the assessor's address fields and the gazetteer, and that's been like the biggest challenge, and we have to go through that each year because these three data sets are not speaking to each other.
Absolutely.
That's certainly where we look for.
That's one of the difficulties of addressing. Yeah. Okay, one more. No, we know the number at an aggregate level because it comes from the C-tax base returns. What we were talking about earlier on was just the detailed empty homes databases that the likes of Mike was describing. We know the numbers, but we don't know the attributes.
Yeah, and we just weren't able to get a list from a council for Stuart to borrow, obviously because of data protection. So that was why we didn't have sort of local data. That's what he meant. Yeah. I think we have to leave it there.
Okay, thanks.